Okay, so this is a sample of what a reflection can look like. So I have my directions pulled up here on the side so you can kind of see what I'm doing while I'm doing it. But I'm going to do a reflection on Unit 1, Menominee History, and I chose that one because this year was the first year that I ever got to learn about Menominee history. So here's my reflection. Okay, so what was this unit about and what were the most important things that I learned about this time in history? So this unit was actually um, it covered all of Menominee history from like pre-contact to modern day. So it covered a lot of things. Some of the topics it mentioned was like the relationships between the Menominees. By the way, while I'm doing this, you guys, I made myself a list of notes based on the questions. So that's what I'm going to be going off of. I suggest, by the way, that you consider doing the same thing. So, yeah, I learned about the relationships between the British, the French, and the Americans. I learned that the Menominees first um, made that relationship with the French, with Jean Nicolet, and then that they supported the French. And then when the French fought against the British, that the Menominees supported the French, but when the British won and the French had to leave, the Menominees made a new relationship with the British. They didn't particularly like the British as much because the British weren't like giving them as many gifts as the French did, and they weren't quite as polite. But eventually, they still got on board with supporting the British. In Pontiac's rebellion, the Menominees supported the British side, even though a lot of other Native Americans were like trying to get rid of the British. I thought that was really interesting. When the British fought against the Americans in the Revolutionary War, the Menominees fought against the Americans. And then even when the British lost and had to leave, the Menominees still like maintained a relationship for a long time. So the relationship with the Americans was like kind of rocky. I learned about termination, like why it happens and how it ended. I learned, and what really surprised me, by the way, is this one of the things, like for number two, that I found most interesting. I learned that a lot of Menominees originally supported termination. I also learned that the Menominees also almost had to move to a new reservation in Crow Wing, Minnesota, but that even though they had like agreed to do that, that they Chief Oshkosh had gone with a group of people to check out the land, and he thought it was not good for Menominees to go, so he requested to stay on like what is now the Menominee Reservation, and I didn't realize that Menominees used to be so like spread out. And so like during the reservation time, everybody had to come to like that smaller area. So it was really interesting. I also learned that Legend Lake was developed by a group called MEI, Menominee Enterprises Incorporated, and I didn't realize that it was like chunked up and sold off to raise money for taxes. Didn't know that. That was part of termination. I also found it really interesting and learned about the Menominee clan system. I didn't realize that so many Menominees like know still to this day what clan they're in. Okay, so I've answered number one and two. Now I'm on to number three. What did I learn about human nature and patterns of human behavior from studying this unit? Okay, on my notes, I said that I realized that people adapt. Like, what really stood out about the Menominees is that they were so practical and they always like knew how to make a relationship with someone in a way that was going to benefit them. Um, I'm just like so impressed with how resilient the Menominee people are. They're like they're survivors, and I saw like the benefit of people cooperating and working together, even though like part of me wanted to see the Menominees like stick it to the government of whichever group they were working with. Like I thought it was very cool that Menominee leaders were smarter and more humble than I am, and they knew when to work together instead of fight, and they knew when to fight. And that brings me to the second part. Like one of the questions for the year long like from this year is what makes a good leader. And I immediately thought about, especially Chief Oshkosh. I'm so obsessed with Chief Oshkosh. He seems so cool. I think a good leader is going to be practical, like Oshkosh was. They're going to stand up for what's right. They're going to include other people's voices. And again, what really stands out is like how Oshkosh reacted to moving to the Crow Wing. Like, even though originally he thought, like, okay, we'll do this, we'll cooperate, when he realized that it wasn't a good thing and it wasn't a good fit, he fought back against it. And I thought that was really cool. So the questions I still have, so I'm on number 4. I am curious about boarding schools. Like, I've heard a lot about boarding schools, and I want to know more about like what was the boarding school experience like in Menominee, and like how did it compare to other places. So that is my reflection on Unit 1 Menominee history.